Your services are no longer required. Those 7 words hit me like a physical impact right in the chest, stealing the air from my lungs and making my stomach drop, as if I were falling through empty space. The polished mahogany conference table in front of me, which I had personally selected 18 years ago, suddenly seemed distant under the harsh boardroom lights. 18 years of my life building Apex Biomed systems from a cramped 3-person operation in a converted Somerville garage into a multi-million-dollar healthcare technology powerhouse. And they were discarding me in 10 seconds with blank, indifferent stares. I slowly looked around the room, making eye contact with each of the board members. These were colleagues I had worked alongside for nearly 2 decades, people who had called me at 2 in the morning when server clusters failed, knowing that Grant Mercer would fix their disasters. Now, none of them had the courage to return my gaze. Except Lawrence Abernathy. The 61-year-old chief executive officer stared right through me, his face a well-rehearsed mask of corporate stoicism, though he could not hide the faint twitch of satisfaction at the corner of his thin mouth. He truly believed he had outmaneuvered me, that he had quietly cut the throat of the man who had built this firm, and that there would be no consequences. My name is Grant Mercer. I am 48 years old, and until 9/17 on that cold Tuesday morning, I was the Chief Operating Officer of Apex Biomed Systems. Before I continue, if you are listening to this, please drop a comment letting me know where you are tuning in from, and subscribe to hear more accounts of professional integrity outlasting corporate greed. We have decided to take Apex Biomed Systems in a fresh strategic direction, Lawrence continued, his voice smooth and entirely devoid of emotion. Jeremy will be stepping into the Chief Operating Officer role, effective immediately. He gestured toward Jeremy Cole, his 32-year-old son-in-law, who sat directly across from me. Jeremy had been with our company for exactly 8 months in a vaguely defined business development role. The same Jeremy who, just last Thursday, had asked me to explain the basic structural difference between Title II compliance regulations under the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act and standard data encryption frameworks. The same Jeremy who had been handed a senior vice president title 48 hours after marrying Lawrence's 29-year-old daughter, Catherine Abernathy. "I see," was all I managed to say. My voice sounded calm, almost detached. "And when exactly did the board vote on this transition?" I turned my gaze to Stuart Caldwell, our chief financial officer, who had texted me yesterday afternoon about our weekly racquetball match. Stuart suddenly found his tablet fascinating, scrolling through empty screens. "The decision was finalized during an executive session last night," Lawrence responded quickly. "An emergency meeting called to address long-term leadership alignment. An emergency session that I, as Chief Operating Officer, was deliberately prevented from attending. It was a secret vote to replace an executive with 18 years of proven operational growth with a former junior analyst whose sole qualification was marrying the boss's daughter. Human Resources has prepared a severance package," Lawrence added, sliding a thick manila envelope across the polished mahogany. "You will find the terms generous, Grant. We are not unreasonable men." "No. Monsters are rarely unreasonable when they are taking what belongs to others," I replied softly, refusing to touch the envelope. 18 years, Lawrence. I sat in this building when we had 12 employees, and I personally signed our first major regional hospital contract. I flew to London on 12 hours' notice with a fever of 102 degrees to save our European distribution deal when everyone else panicked. The boardroom fell dead silent. You could feel the uncomfortable weight of their collective guilt. "We acknowledge your contributions, Grant," Lawrence said mechanically, "but the healthcare sector is evolving. We require new leadership paradigms." "New leadership paradigms," I repeated quietly. What Lawrence actually meant was that Catherine wanted her new husband installed in a corner office. What he meant was that I had built an operational infrastructure so solid that he believed he no longer needed my guidance. Most of all, my insistence on regulatory compliance threatened his absolute authority over the company. I stood up, adjusting my suit jacket. My legs were steady. "I will pack my personal belongings and vacate the premises." "There is no need to rush," Lawrence offered with a patronizing smile. "Security will assist you with the exit logistics." security, as if I had not poured 18 years of blood, sweat, and missed milestones into this firm. I had missed my father's 75th birthday dinner to finalize our funding. My entire adult life had been wrapped around Apex, and now 2 guards were waiting to march me out like a common trespasser. I walked down the glass corridor toward my suite. Word of my termination was already rippling across the floors. Department heads were whispering and checking their phones. Employees who relied on my guidance were averting their eyes, calculating how to realign their loyalties. By mid-afternoon, half of them would send congratulatory emails to Jeremy Cole. My office looked surreal. The framed industry awards, the family photograph, the journals from 18 years of operational strategy. I pulled an empty cardboard box from the closet and began boxing up my career. 18 years reduced to 40 pounds of paper. A gentle knock rattled the door frame. Clara Jennings, my executive assistant of 7 years, stood there with red-rimmed eyes. "Grant," she whispered, closing the door behind herself. "Lawrence's office instructed me to transfer your master calendar and client access credentials to Jeremy's computer. They are telling people that you mishandled the Westlake's acquisition budget. They claim costs were out of control under your oversight." The rewriting of history had begun. They needed to manufacture an operational failure to justify pushing out the man who built the system. "We both know the Westlake integration came in 12% under budget, Clara," I said calmly, placing my desk clock into the box. "Westlake was the most profitable acquisition in our history." "I know," she said, wiping away a tear. "Everyone in operations knows it. But Jeremy is already telling the team that he is taking over all primary accounts, starting with the Johns Hopkins Health Network." "Of course he is," I replied. "Jeremy cannot manage a basic data deployment without my blueprint, but he wants the glory of our largest client." My personal cell phone vibrated on the desk. An unlisted number. I picked it up. "Grant Mercer speaking," I said. "Grant, this is Eleanor Thornton," a crisp, commanding voice replied. Eleanor Thornton was the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Health Systems, Apex's most formidable rival in the region. "Eleanor," I said, surprised. "This is an unexpected call. I will get right to the point, Grant," she said. "News travels fast in Cambridge. I know what Lawrence did in the boardroom 40 minutes ago. I am offering you an immediate meeting at 4 o'clock today." "Why the sudden interest, Eleanor?" I asked. "Because Lawrence Abernathy just committed the single most foolish executive error in biotech history," she answered smoothly. "And I intend to ensure Vanguard Health Systems reaps the full benefit of his stupidity. Meet me at the Langham in the tea lounge at 4 o'clock. Come alone, and let us discuss how to turn your exit into Lawrence's worst nightmare." She hung up before I could respond. Lawrence believed he could push me out, wipe my name off the organizational chart, and collect bonuses on the back of my labor. He mistook my professional discipline for weakness. Security arrived at 3:45 in the afternoon. Hank and Toby, 2 guards whose hiring requisitions I had signed 3 years ago, stood at my door looking deeply uncomfortable. "We are just following protocol, Mr. Mercer," Hank said quietly. "I understand, Hank," I replied, picking up my box. "Everyone is just following orders." As we walked through the central lobby, Jeremy Cole was standing near the glass elevator surrounded by 3 junior managers. He offered a smug nod of pity as I approached. I stopped right in front of him. "Congratulations on the promotion, Jeremy," I said clearly. "Quick question before I leave. Can you define the primary statutory difference between Title II compliance under the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act and standard data encryption frameworks?" Jeremy's face flushed bright red. The junior managers looked back and forth in awkward silence. "Encryption is handled by the IT department," Jeremy stammered. 1996 federal statute," I corrected him calmly. "Section 164.308. The master compliance manuals are in the blue binder on the top shelf of your new office. Read them before your call with Dr. Sinclair tomorrow." Without waiting for his answer, I walked out into the cold afternoon air, leaving Jeremy standing in the center of the lobby with his confidence shaken and the whispers starting behind his back. My 18 years at Apex were over, but my career was far from finished. The Langham Hotel presented a striking contrast to Apex's cold glass and steel architecture. Its rich wood paneling and quiet elegance spoke of enduring strength. Sitting in a quiet corner of the tea lounge, Eleanor Thornton looked every bit the master strategist. At 55 years old, she possessed a razor-sharp mind and an unmistakable presence. She stood as I approached, extending a firm handshake. "Grant, thank you for being punctual." "Curiosity got the better of me, Eleanor," I admitted, taking a seat. "My schedule opened up unexpectedly this morning." A thin smile touched her lips. "Let us order espresso first. Then we can discuss how Apex Biomed Systems just handed Vanguard the greatest competitive advantage we have seen in a decade." Once the waiter placed the cups on the table, Eleanor studied me. "I have tracked your operational work for 18 years, Grant. You built Apex's infrastructure, their hospital data pipelines, their regulatory frameworks, and their client retention systems. You are Apex Biomed Systems. Lawrence Abernathy is merely the mouthpiece who signs the press releases." The truth of her words stung. "Apparently the board feels differently," I said. "Apparently, 18 years of operational excellence can be replaced overnight by a man whose primary asset is his marriage certificate." "Lawrence is an arrogant fool," Eleanor said flatly. "But his hubris is our opportunity. I want you at Vanguard Health Systems, Grant. Not as a salaried executive, but as a managing senior partner with full equity and a seat on our governing board." I set my cup down, processing the magnitude of her offer. A senior partner with equity? That is a massive commitment for someone who was your chief rival 4 hours ago. Why offer that level of authority? Because half of a market-dominating enterprise is vastly superior to 100% of a stagnant one, she answered. "I know your non-compete covenants." Lawrence's legal team uses the standard Massachusetts executive template. It restricts you from joining a direct competitor as an operational officer for 12 months and prohibits soliciting Apex employees. But it contains a regulatory exemption that Lawrence's attorneys overlooked. "Which exemption?" I asked, leaning forward. "It cannot prevent you from acting as an independent regulatory and operational consultant for third-party healthcare networks," Eleanor explained. "Under state commercial law, specifically Chapter 149, Section 24L of the Massachusetts General Laws, hospital networks have the legal right to retain independent advisors to audit their data infrastructure. You can consult directly for healthcare systems, evaluating vendor contracts, without violating your restrictive covenant." The elegance of the strategy was brilliant. I would operate an independent consultancy auditing major hospital accounts. If those hospital accounts discovered that Apex was failing operational standards under Jeremy Cole, they would naturally migrate their contracts to Vanguard. "Why is Lawrence so desperate to clear me out right now?" I asked. "What is he hiding?" Eleanor's smile faded into a serious expression. "The Novus Biotech deal," she revealed. "Lawrence is preparing to announce a $3,400,000,000 acquisition of Novus Biotech next month. It is designed to be his legacy deal before he retires." I frowned. "Novus Biotech?" "Their prescription architecture is flashy, but their underlying data security protocols are notoriously unstable. I warned Lawrence against looking at Novus 6 months ago." "Exactly," Eleanor nodded. "Novus has massive unaddressed regulatory exposure under Title II of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Their cloud storage mechanisms violate federal encryption guidelines, exposing patient records to severe statutory liability. If you had stayed as chief operating officer, you would have flagged the liability or killed the transaction. Lawrence could not risk you shutting down his legacy deal. He needed a compliant puppet, like Jeremy Cole, who would sign off without asking questions. My termination was a corporate cover-up. Lawrence removed me because my integrity threatened his $3,400,000,000 gamble." "I take it you want to stop that acquisition?" I asked. "I want to expose the truth," Eleanor corrected. "And more importantly, I want Vanguard to secure the Johns Hopkins Health Network contract. Their $62 million annual agreement with Apex is up for statutory renewal in 90 days. It represents 30% of Apex's recurring revenue. Without that account, Apex's valuation collapses and Lawrence's legacy deal dies." I took a slow breath, weighing the path ahead. The Johns Hopkins relationship was something I had personally built over 12 years of painstaking work. "If I accept your partnership proposal," I said, Setting my terms, I require 3 non-negotiable conditions. First, complete operational autonomy over my independent consulting practice. Second, full financial backing to recruit top-tier technical analysts once non-solicitation windows clear. Third, a strict legal defense indemnification clause protecting my practice against frivolous litigation from Lawrence. Done, Eleanor answered without hesitation, pulling out a pre-drafted agreement. My legal team spent the last 3 hours customizing this framework. Everything you requested is included. I took out my pen, the same silver pen I used to sign Apex's very first hospital contract 18 years ago, and signed the document. As I walked out of the Langham, my personal cell phone rang. The display showed the name Dr. Edward Sinclair, Chief Medical Officer of the Johns Hopkins Health Network. Grant, Dr. Sinclair's deep voice came through. I just received a formal notification from Lawrence Abernathy's office, claiming that you stepped down from Apex Biomed Systems for personal reasons, and that his son-in-law is taking over our account management. Is there any truth to this nonsense? Edward, I answered. The board decided to restructure executive leadership this morning. My separation from Apex is effective immediately. There was a long pause. Grant, we chose Apex 12 years ago because of your personal oversight. Dr. Sinclair said, we do not know this Jeremy character, but his assistant called my office, attempting to reschedule our quarterly compliance audit because he was unfamiliar with our system architecture. That is completely unacceptable for an account of our scale. I understand your frustration. Edward, I replied. We are initiating our formal vendor evaluation process for the $62 million contract renewal. Tomorrow morning, Dr. Sinclair continued, I want your independent consulting firm to lead our technical audit. Can you take the assignment? I stood on the sidewalk, looking across the Charles River at the Apex building. I would be honored to assist Johns Hopkins, Dr. Sinclair, I said smoothly. We begin the audit first thing tomorrow morning. By 9 o'clock the following morning, my new independent consulting practice, Mercer Operational Advisors, was fully registered and operating out of a modern office suite in Cambridge. The location was intentionally selected. My broad bay windows provided a direct, unobstructed view of Apex's executive tower right across the Charles River. Every time Lawrence Abernathy looked out his window, he would be forced to look toward the building where his former chief operating officer was quietly dismantling his empire. My phone chimed with a text from Clara Jennings at 10:30 in the morning. Jeremy tried to present the Westlake integration files to the board this morning, she wrote. He could not locate the data architecture maps because you kept them in the master compliance directory. Lawrence had to pause the board meeting. The executive suite is in total chaos. I smiled, placing the phone face down. The data architecture maps were not missing. They were filed exactly where federal compliance regulations mandated they be stored. But without my 18 years of institutional knowledge, Jeremy Cole was like a blind man attempting to navigate a high-security maze. He did not even know which questions to ask. 2 hours later, another update arrived. Harborview Hospital, a regional healthcare provider that generated $14 million in annual software licensing for Apex, formally issued a notice of contract suspension. Jeremy had missed a critical statutory deadline to submit their annual HIPAA data security certification, triggering an automatic breach clause in their service agreement. Without my constant oversight to catch regulatory deadlines before they expired, Apex's primary accounts were fracturing. I spent the remainder of the afternoon reviewing the preliminary audit documentation for the Johns Hopkins Health Network. As their retained independent advisor, my task was straightforward. Evaluate whether Apex's current operational infrastructure under Jeremy Cole met the data integrity standards required for their $62 million annual renewal. What I discovered in the system logs was alarming. To prepare for the upcoming acquisition of Novus Biotech, Jeremy had already authorized preliminary network bridges between Apex's core servers and Novus's unencrypted cloud repositories. He had bypassed standard due diligence protocols, exposing Johns Hopkins patient records to severe statutory vulnerabilities under Title II of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. This was not merely executive negligence. It was a reckless breach of fiduciary duty driven by Lawrence Abernathy's desperation to finalize his legacy deal before the fiscal year ended. At 3:45 in the afternoon, my office line rang. The caller identifier displayed Apex's main executive line, I answered. "This is Grant Mercer," I said. Grant, Lawrence Abernathy's voice boomed through the speaker, carrying a forced warmth that failed to mask the underlying tension in his tone. "I hope you are enjoying your time off." "I am actually quite busy, Lawrence," I replied neutrally. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this call?" "Look, Grant," Lawrence began, clearing his throat. "I think our meeting on Tuesday morning was somewhat hasty. The board was under tremendous pressure regarding strategic alignment, and perhaps communications were not handled with the finesse you deserved after 18 years with the firm." I listened quietly, letting the silence stretch until Lawrence felt compelled to fill it. "The board met again at lunch," Lawrence continued. "We recognize that your institutional knowledge is vital for our ongoing stability. We are prepared to offer you a senior executive advisory position, a compensation package of $1,800,000 annually, full retention of your equity options, and complete flexibility regarding your working hours. You would report directly to me, helping Jeremy navigate the transition." Translation: Jeremy was drowning, the board was panicking over the lost Harborview account, and Lawrence needed me to step back in and secretly do his son-in-law's job while Jeremy collected the praise and the title. "That is a lucrative offer, Lawrence," I said, looking out my window at his office tower. "But my answer is no." Lawrence's warmth evaporated into cold fury. "Do not be ridiculous, Grant. You built this company. You cannot turn your back on 18 years of work because your pride was bruised by a management transition." "My pride is entirely intact, Lawrence," I replied, "but my professional integrity is not for sale. You replaced an operational executive with an unqualified family member to push through a dubious $3,400,000,000 acquisition that violates federal compliance standards. You made a calculated business decision. Now you are experiencing the market consequences of that decision. You think you can play games with me?" Lawrence sneered. "We have a non-compete agreement. If I discover you are assisting Eleanor or Vanguard in any capacity, our legal team will file an injunction and freeze your severance assets." I picked up a paper reading directly from the statutory text. Under Chapter 149, Section 24L of the Massachusetts General Laws, executive non-compete agreements are strictly unenforceable against independent consultants retained directly by licensed healthcare providers for compliance auditing. Furthermore, under federal labor law, specifically Section 2101 of Title 29 of the United States Code, which is the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, your emergency termination of my employment without 60 days prior written notice constitutes an uncured statutory violation. My legal counsel filed a formal notice of dispute with the Department of Labor this morning. Silence blanketed the line. Lawrence had spent decades using legal threats to intimidate subordinates. But he had forgotten that I had spent 18 years working alongside corporate attorneys to draft those very same regulatory frameworks. "If you attempt to enforce an illegal covenant, Lawrence," I added calmly, "my attorneys will immediately subpoena the executive board minutes from Tuesday morning, along with all internal communications regarding the Novus Biotech acquisition. I suggest you consult your legal team before making another phone call." I hung up the phone without waiting for a reply, knowing that the chessboard was now fully set and the next move belonged to me. That evening, I met with 3 of Apex's top senior data systems architects at a quiet restaurant in downtown Boston. Their non-solicitation restrictions did not apply because they had voluntarily submitted their resignations to Jeremy earlier that afternoon, disgusted by his arrogance and total lack of technical competence. "We want to join Mercer Operational Advisors," Ian Fletcher, the lead architect, told me over dinner. "Jeremy instructed us to override HIPAA security protocols to force the Novus data integration through before the end of the month. We refused to sign off on illegal system modifications." "Welcome to the team," I said, raising my glass. "Tomorrow we deliver our preliminary audit report to Dr. Edward Sinclair at Johns Hopkins. The formal audit presentation took place in the Grand Executive Boardroom of the Johns Hopkins Health Network in Baltimore. Dr. Edward Sinclair sat at the head of the long conference table, flanked by 7 senior board members, 3 legal counsels, and the chief information officer. Sitting across from them, I projected the detailed data architecture analysis onto the primary screen, flanked by my senior analysts, Ian Fletcher and Olivia Bennett. Over the past 2 weeks, my team had conducted an audit of Apex's operational infrastructure. What we uncovered was far worse than simple mismanagement. As you can see from the server access logs, I explained, pointing to a highlighted section of system code on the screen. Apex has initiated unauthorized data bridges with Novus Biotech's unencrypted cloud servers. These bridges directly bypass mandatory encryption standards established under Title II of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, specifically Section 164.3.12 of Title 45 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Dr. Sinclair's expression hardened. Has patient data from our network been exposed to these unencrypted servers? Not yet, Dr. Sinclair, I replied smoothly. Because my team identified the configuration anomaly during our routine audit and alerted your IT security team to sever the external data bridge 24 hours ago. However, had this bridge remained active for another week, Johns Hopkins would have faced mandatory federal disclosure requirements and potential statutory fines exceeding $25 million. A heavy murmur washed across the boardroom. The Johns Hopkins legal counsel leaned forward, reviewing the documented evidence. Who authorized these server bridge modifications at Apex? The chief information officer asked. The system modifications bear the digital authorization signature of Jeremy Cole, chief operating officer, I answered calmly. It appears the changes were executed to expedite Apex's pending $3.4 billion acquisition of Novus Biotech without performing standard regulatory due diligence. This is a catastrophic breach of trust, Dr. Sinclair stated firmly, looking around at his fellow board members. Apex Biomed Systems has compromised operational integrity to chase a corporate acquisition. At that exact moment, Olivia Bennett passed me a printed document. It was a formal communication from Stuart Caldwell, Apex's chief financial officer. Stuart had finally realized that Lawrence Abernathy's reckless ambition was going to drag the entire executive team into criminal liability. Attached to his email were the certified minutes of the secret board meeting held 3 weeks prior to my termination. The records proved beyond any doubt that Lawrence had planned my removal weeks in advance, specifically because I had submitted a formal internal memo warning the board that acquiring Novus Biotech would trigger massive statutory non-compliance and violate Section 271 of Title 35 of the United States Code regarding patent infringement liabilities. Lawrence had lied to the board, lied to the shareholders, and lied to our primary clients, fabricating a story about budget overruns to remove the one executive who stood between him and a fraudulent acquisition. The evidence is conclusive, Dr. Sinclair announced, closing his leather binder. The Johns Hopkins Health Network hereby terminates all contract renewal negotiations with Apex Biomed Systems. We will allow their existing agreement to expire at the end of this month. He turned his gaze directly to me. Grant, your independent audit saved our institution from a catastrophic regulatory disaster. We have reviewed Vanguard Health Systems' proposal, contingent upon your appointment as senior managing partner overseeing our account. We are prepared to award Vanguard an expanded 5-year service agreement valued at $78 million annually. $78 million annually. It was $16 million larger than Apex's previous contract, expanding Vanguard's operational footprint across the entire eastern seaboard. I accept the terms on behalf of Vanguard Health Systems, Dr. Sinclair. I responded, shaking his hand firmly. The battle was won and the destruction of Lawrence's empire had begun. The news of Johns Hopkins cancellations struck Apex Biomed Systems like a localized economic earthquake. Within 48 hours of the formal announcement, the story was broken by major financial news outlets. TechCrunch published a damning investigative report exposing the compliance failures behind the collapsed Novus Biotech acquisition. citing internal memos that highlighted Jeremy Cole's unauthorized security overrides. The financial fallout was immediate and devastating. Apex's public stock price plummeted 29% in a single trading session, wiping out over $800 million in market capitalization. Institutional investors demanded an emergency shareholder assembly, while the Securities and Exchange Commission opened a formal inquiry into Lawrence Abernathy and the board of directors for breach of fiduciary duty and failure to disclose material operational risks under Title 17 of the United States Code. On Friday afternoon, Clara Jennings sent me her final text message. "The board just held an emergency vote," she wrote. Lawrence Abernathy was stripped of his chief executive title and forced to resign in disgrace. Jeremy Cole was terminated immediately and escorted off the campus by the same security guards who walked you out 4 weeks ago. The company has hired a crisis management team to try to stop the financial bleeding. I stood by my office window in Cambridge, looking across the Charles River at the quiet executive suite of Apex Biomed Systems. The mahogany table where Lawrence had smugly announced that my services were no longer required was now surrounded by regulatory attorneys and forensic accountants. Lawrence had believed that Apex belonged to him because his name was on the building's lease and his title was Chief Executive Officer. He had failed to understand a fundamental truth of modern business. An empire is not defined by its executive titles or mahogany furniture. It is sustained by the dedication, integrity, and institutional competence of the people who build it every single day. Without the foundation I spent 18 years constructing, Lawrence's corporate tower was a fragile house of cards waiting for the first strong wind to blow it down. 4 weeks after my termination from Apex, I stood in the main auditorium of Vanguard Health Systems corporate headquarters in downtown Boston. Surrounding me were over 200 employees, technical analysts, and healthcare administrators, including 60 former Apex staff members who had resigned from Lawrence's crumbling firm to join our expanding division. Eleanor Thornton walked up to the podium, smiling broadly as she addressed the crowd. "Today marks a milestone for Vanguard," she announced. With the $78 million contract with Johns Hopkins, Vanguard becomes the premier provider on the East Coast, and I am immensely proud to introduce our new senior managing partner and chief operating officer, Grant Mercer. Applause filled the auditorium, genuine and warm. Standing beside Eleanor, holding the signed $78 million contract that represented complete vindication, I felt a deep, profound sense of peace. 18 years ago, I poured my youth, energy, and personal life into building Apex. I sacrificed family gatherings, personal relationships, and countless nights of sleep, believing corporate loyalty would be rewarded with mutual respect. When Lawrence Abernathy discarded me across that mahogany table with 7 cold words, I thought 18 years of my life had been erased in an instant. I had been wrong. Lawrence had taken away my title, my corner office, and my access badge. But he could not take away my expertise, my reputation, or the trust I had earned from clients over nearly 2 decades of unwavering integrity. He believed he was stripping me of my power, when in reality, he was merely releasing me from the constraints of his arrogant micromanagement. After the presentation concluded, I returned to my new executive suite on the top floor of Vanguard's tower. Clara, who joined Vanguard as my operations coordinator, walked in carrying coffee. "Your afternoon schedule is confirmed, Grant," she said with a bright smile. "We have onboarding meetings with 3 regional hospital networks that just canceled their contracts with Apex." "Thank you, Clara," I replied, taking the coffee. "How is the transition going for the technical team? Ian and Olivia have already re-architected the Johns Hopkins data pipeline," she answered proudly. "Our system performance metrics are running 35% faster than Apex's old framework. And without Jeremy Cole interfering in compliance, everyone is working with absolute confidence." Once Clara stepped out, I walked over to the glass window, looking out across the Charles River. The late afternoon sun cast a warm golden light over the Boston skyline. Across the water, the Apex building looked diminished, its top floors sparsely populated as remaining executives scrambled to address regulatory audits and shareholder lawsuits. My cell phone chimed on the desk, An incoming email notification from a legal counsel representing Apex's restructuring committee. The email contained a formal letter from the board offering a full public retraction of their previous statements regarding the Westlake acquisition, along with an invitation to settle all outstanding worker adjustment and retraining Notification Act statutory claims for an undisclosed financial sum. I did not feel malice or hatred as I read the letter. The desire for destructive revenge that had burned inside me on the morning of my firing had long since faded, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of constructive achievement. True vindication was not about watching Lawrence Abernathy crumble in disgrace. It was about building something stronger, cleaner, and vastly more successful on the foundation of my own values. I drafted a brief reply instructing my legal counsel to accept the retraction and finalize the settlement, with all proceeds to be donated directly to an engineering scholarship fund. I picked up my pen, the silver pen that had seen me through 18 years of corporate battles, and signed the final partnership documents on my desk. As I looked out one last time at the fading silhouette of Apex across the river, I whispered quietly to the glass window, "Your services are no longer required, Lawrence." If you have ever been underestimated by corporate arrogance, overlooked despite your years of dedication, or replaced by someone whose only qualification was who they knew rather than what they could achieve, remember this. Your true value is never defined by the title someone takes away from you. It is defined by the integrity, knowledge, and resilience you carry within yourself. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced corporate betrayal, and how did you turn that setback into your greatest victory? If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-world accounts of professional integrity prevailing over executive greed. Sometimes, the most powerful response to betrayal is not fighting the past, but building a future so bright that the past becomes entirely irrelevant.